Welcome back to Kingdom Commentary Podcast, where we discuss the ideas, tools, and narratives that surround what Jesus called the kingdom of God and how they shape our imagination today. In this series, we're looking at what the Bible calls the gospel of the kingdom and what it means for the kingdom of God to have arrived. Welcome back to Kingdom Commentary. My name is Matt Holliday, and I'm here with Josh Brinley. How are you doing, Josh?
You're looking at.
Making sure everything's working. How you doing? How you doing, Josh?
Great.
Yeah? Looking
Wonderful,
cozy?
actually. Thank you.
I love that we live in California because I can dress in a t-shirt and someone else can dress in a sweater and nobody bats an eye because both are always appropriate.
Adequate.
Yeah. There we go. Happy Advent season.
Yes.
Does your church do... Sorry. It's just a little brisk.
Okay.
Does you go to a more liturgical church than I do. Does your
Yeah.
church have any Advent traditions?
Yeah. We do an Advent celebration. The service is different a little bit.
What's it like?
Well, there's always like the church calendar colors and things like that, which is kind of cool.
Blue or purple? Do you do blue or purple?
Purple.
Purple.
Yeah. It's been purple every church I've gone to,
Mhm.
but I've heard that sometimes they do blue too. But purple is usually what they'll do, and then the service, some of the things are changed. They'll change like the music and things like that, but sometimes the order is done a little bit differently, and then the scriptures and stuff are around Advent themed, which is kind of fun. But I always enjoy uh when people will do sermons around Advent. I like that they dig deeper because I think it's really like easy to be like, oh, like the birth of Jesus
Yeah.
and all this, but like going deeper and sometimes like going into. There was one sermon where it was like, actually like the birth of Jesus probably wasn't like this like, oh, like lit up thing. Like realistically, it was probably like really tough. Like if
Yeah.
it was actually like, or like in a cave or like stuff like that. And it's like, this probably was not an easy thing to happen because like they had no resources. Like they were with a bunch of animals and stuff like that. And like it was probably really dark.
Yep.
So, I kind of like it when people dive into stuff like that rather than sort of like the typical thing that you hear, which is, I don't
Merry
know,
Christmas.
not the most interesting because you just heard it 1,000 times. So people dig a bit deeper, but yeah, no, it's a cool time. There's they usually do a like a catechesis series on like what is Advent. There's like this book that they
Cool.
usually use, an Advent book, kind of talking about the season of Advent, and
Nice.
so, yeah, that's good.
My church has not always done Advent, but is an Advent the last probably like almost 10 years consistently. And this will be my 4th year doing the Hope Sunday
Mm-hmm.
in a row. And I always do the Hope Sunday, and I always go for like the dark Advent, like this story is all about suffering.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's about God being with you in suffering.
Yeah.
And sometimes the disappointment of that and the mix of like not what you expected and waiting and just like the uncomfortability of that.
Yeah.
And I love it because I'm like, it's just real. This is not what people expect. This is gritty, and this is what the Bible says. And I always get some like, that was nice, but it wasn't very happy. And I was like,
Yeah.
Advent's actually not supposed to be a super happy season. Christmas is, that's after, but that's okay.
So I kind of like
get it.
I like God rest you merry gentlemen.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically for that line that's like what is it? Taken by Satan's power or something like
To
that.
save the world from Satan's power.
To save the world from Satan's
Relevant to what we're talking about.
power. Yeah, I always thought that line was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is a little gritty, I guess.
Mhm.
I don't know, as a kid, that just stuck with me. I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah, when we have gone astray.
Yeah. That fascinated me.
Yeah. I love O Come, Emmanuel.
Uh-huh.
That's my favorite, to ransom captive Israel. Like,
Mhm.
oh, that's way deeper than most Christmas songs even go. Like right there, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I mean, that and Last Christmas by Wham are probably the top 2 Christmas songs for me. So, what a
Wham.
yeah, dude. First of all, Wham's Last Christmas, the only Christmas song that cannot be overplayed.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter how many times you hear it; it's a banger every time. That no come. Do you have any Christmas songs that you're like, that's a banger every time?
Not other than God Rest You Merry Gentlemen.
No, not Mariah
I
Carey.
don't know. I like the jazzy, like Christmas. It's
Michael
really
Bublé Christmas.
instrumental and things like that. Yeah, I
Michael
like
Christmas
those kinds of things
instruments.
because it puts me into the Christmas mood, and I just feel like it's cozy. Like when I was driving over here,
Yeah.
I put on just it's like a cozy Christmas jazz playlist
Nice.
on Spotify.
We should put some decorations
Nice.
up here.
Yeah.
I realize.
Just imagine there's like
Imagine there's a
I
big
don't
wreath.
know. Yeah.
If you're listening and not watching, there's a big wreath behind us.
Yes,
beautiful.
big wreath here
It's beautiful.
with beautiful red flowers.
Mhm. No, I always love when sermons go more into the incarnation than people think too. So I think that's such an overlooked part of our salvation. We focus so much on the cross, we miss sometimes the importance of the birth. And yeah, I'm excited for this season.
Good. Yeah.
Well, any movies you're looking forward to this month? Christmas time? Like anything significant?
I already watched Home Alone, the first one, which is always a classic. I always look forward to watch. I watched Die Hard
Nice.
as well.
Oh, that's the best Christmas
There's
movie.
people are like debate whether or not that's a Christmas
It's
movie.
not
Like
even
it's
a debate.
Christmas themed.
Yeah.
They say Merry Christmas. They talk about Christmas. It's a Christmas movie.
My family watched The Holdovers.
Yeah.
Which, have you seen it? Or
No, never seen it. No, but I heard of it. And I heard it was really good.
Yeah, the way they do it, I've never seen a movie done in that style. That's this recent. It's just so unique. Like it makes even the pacing slow, like a 70s movie, but it still grips you the whole time because of the style, the aesthetic, the characters are so interesting. You're like, I love it, and it's a little sad and a little wholesome, and it reminds me of what I don't want to be as a high school teacher.
Oh wow!
It's just like an angry, bitter old man
Yeah.
who is a good teacher but a bad mixed person.
Mhm.
But it is a wholesome movie.
I like that film's kind of done this rotation where like it's gone up. There was a lot of like technological advancement and things like that, but now to be novel, they're kind of going back to revitalizing older methods of film. Like the big thing is like film.
Yeah, I mean, well, nothing looks real anymore
Instead
in
of
movies,
digital.
too. It's like, how high quality do you want it to be before it's so high quality that that's not how our eyes work. If you don't see things
It
in
looks
that
odd.
depth, and it looks fake because we don't see things that clearly.
Right. So I think it's interesting to dive back into those other methods that make the film interesting and can inform like the message. Like for something that's older or you're trying to show something that's more old fashioned, it makes sense to use old fashioned methods to make it feel unique, authentic.
Even
like
the audio
recording,
sounds different.
Yeah. So I enjoyed that part of it when there's very intentional methods, like when it comes to practical things, like mechanical changes that you make, like the camera that you use or whatever.
Yeah.
To make it feel that way. Shows that they care about the art.
I
enjoy that.
Yeah, me too. And that really makes that movie like another level, I think.
Right.
Next Christmas is Dune, I think. That's filmed all on IMAX.
Oh, yeah. Oh my. It's going to be so good. I hope. I really do. I hope.
It's got to be, right?
Yeah. I mean, the other two films are really, really good.
The next Avengers movie is coming out on the same day.
Which is absolutely crazy. I don't understand.
I don't understand either.
Why did they do that?
Maybe it'll be good. Probably won't be.
I hope they're both
Probably
good.
won't be
Honestly, I would
It
hope
probably
that they're
won't.
both good.
Me too, sure.
But
the only reason I want to see the new Avengers because they're bringing back all the X-Men that I grew up with.
Right.
Hugh Jackman.
With all the outfits and everything.
Yeah.
I saw the
leather.
the picture with them all together, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but if they ruin it, then I don't want to see it.
It'll probably be
They probably ruin it.
It'll be like a redeeming film, maybe.
We'll see. I don't know. I don't have high hopes. But this Christmas is Avatar 3. Which,
No, don't give me that.
hey, no,
movie.
we have a mutual friend who loves
Yeah.
those movies, and he's
A lot.
coming here in December
To watch.
to watch it on IMAX in San Francisco.
Oh wow, that's a nice theater.
Yeah, I'm like, and I'll go with him to see an IMAX
Yeah.
movie in San Francisco.
What is it? The Fire.
Something like that. Fire and Ash. I won't enjoy it as much as he does, but that's okay.
I'm sure it'll be cool.
I mean, it's always
I don't
like,
honestly.
it's always,
I kind of want to see it.
they're always visually interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
I just don't really ever remember what happens in any of them, and they're all long.
they are. I remember the last one had a lot to do with like the commentary on like island nations and whaling.
Yeah, they're always a little
like,
bit like
things like- yeah.
ecological messages.
right.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are continuing to pivot really hard on to the theme of the reign of God, or the kingdom of God series, where we are talking about what it means to live under God's reign, what life looks like under God's reign, and what the gospel announcement that the reign of God is here means. And we've covered a lot already. We've talked about what life looks like according to Genesis 1 and 2 under God's reign. We talked about life outside of God's reign in Genesis 3 through 11, and how there are empires instead of God's kingdom. There are human empires that are enslaved to spiritual powers, Satan's power. And it's interesting, the Old Testament doesn't even call Satan, use the word Satan to describe that power, but the New Testament does, and sort of like talks about, but there's this consistent themes of these beings that are powers, that are forces that cause corruption and death. And
Does it not say Satan in Job?
it does in Job, but in Job, he has a very specific role, and it's not as grand. It's more like accusing Job. And
Yeah.
there's a big debate about whether or not that's the same Satan,
No, okay.
actually,
Yeah.
because the word just means accuser or adversary.
Right.
It could be a different accuser.
Right.
It seems like a lot of Jewish people thought it was the same one, but it was sort of a development of an idea also. Like, they didn't have as fixed of an idea. And they definitely didn't associate, like, this is a whole tangent, but like, if you're an Old Testament scholar, you're not going to associate the snake and the Satan in Job. Because they have different
Okay.
roles, different
Sure.
names, different pieces in society. One is just like a member of God's divine council that seems adversarial, that accuses humans. And one is like the father of humanity's turn toward death. That is this chaos monster.
Yeah.
And then over time, they really like merge the ideas. And in the New Testament, it's sort of this one idea of this Satan figure that is enslaved all of humanity, and all the nations are under his power, as all of the nations are under these individual powers of chaos and death. But again, not an ultimate power.
Yeah.
A delegated power, more like governors. Wow, God, the president or the king, has the highest power anyway, and it's his job to straighten out those delegates so that we can be those delegates, which is our job in the first place. And that leads us to Genesis 12. So, but what I want to do today is just talk about, we're going to go so broad, we're going to skip too much. And, but I want to flesh out the idea of this family that God calls Israel throughout the Old Testament being the embodiment of God's reign in a family, so that the plan of creation going to consummation can get back on track.
Mm-hmm.
And what's tricky is it's sort of like, I picked up the Red Bull and I didn't drink it. I put it back down.
Yeah, there. I was waiting.
You pointed out that when I get really excited about what I'm talking about, my knees
The
get
foot. Yeah.
closer to my face. I like start to like ball up. I'm not really sure what that is.
You also do this.
Do I?
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Your hand goes up.
Anyway,
Exposed.
I'm getting a little more excited, as you can tell. There are like sort of like an A plot, B plot, C plot, D plot in the Bible, where there's an overarching story, and then a problem in the secondary story, and then a third story, and then a fourth, and then they sort of like fulfill each other as you go along. So the A plot is creation to consummation. Like, God created a good world. He's going to bring it into himself as he lives in it and transforms it, and he's going to use humans to do that. B plot, humanity gets enslaved to these powers that they subject themselves to by turning away from God and leaving the cosmic geography of heaven on earth, God's presence and life and wisdom. They leave that. They go into a world of chaos and death, subject themselves to the powers of chaos and death. give up their role as delegates to these powers. C plot. One family gets chosen out of all the families that are subject to all the powers. One family gets chosen to be freed from the powers so that they can serve God under God's reign, so that all nations can come back under God's reign, so that creation could find its fulfillment as humanity takes up God's reign again and consummation. So A plot, B plot, C plot. And then there's even a D plot where we'll look at Israel goes off the rails and subjects himself to the powers. And their king needs to get them back on track so that Israel can get back on track, so that humanity can get back on track, so creation can get back on track. So it's sort of like it's microcosms of the story on smaller scales. And we talked about how God's kingdom is defined by order and life. So his presence is there and his order and life are there. And humans embody that order and life in the way they live. So we get the story of Abraham or Abram, and he's chosen out of the nations to leave his gods, to leave the powers he's subject to and leave his kingdom, go to this new land, Canaan, and God promises to give him that land, make him a nation, be fruitful and multiply, fulfill the calling that Adam and Eve were supposed to have, rule the world well, spread God's life and order in their family. And he gets a promise. And the promise is described two ways. And the second way I'm going to spend a little more time on, and it might be not, we'll see how convincing I can be with it. But the first one is he gets a few promises. One starts in Genesis 12, but one is like your children, your descendants are going to be like the sand of the sea. So like you're going to have so many descendants. And I'm going to bless you, which is what he did to the humans in the garden. He's going to basically make them a heaven on earth space that they can live in Canaan. He's going to turn Canaan into this garden of heaven and earth so that they can embody God's reign and they can get the project of transforming the entire universe into God's reign back on track as humans rule in this family, right? And he promises this. And then he says, I'm also going to make them as the stars in the sky. And he actually says that twice. Once he says, I'm going to make them as numerous as the stars in the sky. And the second time he says, I'm going to make them like the stars in the sky. And there's a big conversation about what that means. That's in Old Testament scholarship that I'll touch on briefly. And you can tell me what you think. I don't know. Some people find it more convincing than others, but I actually think there's something to it. Where throughout the Old Testament, the stars are sort of symbolically represent the powers of heaven, like the hosts of heaven. Because host just means like the people that live there, and heaven just means the skies. and to them, the skies were a symbol of authority, a realm of authority. And although God lived in the highest heaven, so he had the most authority over all the universe, there are these spiritual beings, good and bad, that are delegates that live in a lower levels of authority, lower levels of heaven, lower levels of authority in the world, in creation, in systems and organizations of humans, all that stuff. And the stars sort of represented that to them. So they use the stars all the time when they're talking about spiritual beings. And there's this sort of like, the stars represent these spiritual beings. And again, I don't think they were stupid. I don't think they thought the stars really were those spiritual beings. That's debatable, but I don't think they did. But I think they really saw them as images of hosts of heaven. Like you see all these beings that seem like they're moving around up in the sky. And it makes sense when you have this picture of these beings that are in this invisible realm ruling the world. And to tell Abram that his children are going to be like that they're going to shine with God's presence and light and life, that they are going to rule in the heavens on earth. In like Adam and Eve were supposed to.
Right.
It's sort of like this promise, your children are going to be the kind of humans that Adam and Eve were supposed to grow into.
Right.
And that is a much bigger promise than just increase big number, but like in calling and in their life.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, based on the conversation we've had building this out, it makes sense that this idea of like spiritual significance, like spiritual authority bestowed on, or rightfully wanted to be bestowed on humans as the image of God.
Yeah.
And then the return to that is the natural goal that God has.
Yeah.
So the imagery makes sense. Whether or not it clears and is like That's
Yeah.
actually what it's supposed to be. I mean,
Well, whether or not
hard
it's
to
what it's
say.
actually supposed to be,
It functions
historically,
that way.
allegorically,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
fits a pattern.
yeah,
And Daniel sees that pattern and incorporates it when he
yeah.
talks about resurrected people being like stars.
Right. Or I
And
mean,
and the
transfiguration,
transfiguration, like flowing like a star
things
that
like that.
rules on
It's
heaven and
repeated
earth
for
over
sure.
and over again. So
Yeah.
it is this theme that's there.
Mhm. Yeah.
In the finished product, whether or not the original manuscript meant that or whatever,
Sure.
in the finished assembly of the scriptures.
Yeah.
Um, and there's this also this story in Psalm 82 that's a really unique psalm where God goes into his divine counsel to talk to all the other gods, like in Job, basically. And it's poetry, it's a psalm, so it's not like a literal picture, but he's talking to all of these spiritual beings. And he's like, all the nations are at war with each other. You guys are in charge of all the nations, right? What's going on? Why are you're causing them to destroy themselves. And then he tells all these spiritual beings, you are gods, but you are all going to die like mortals. And your authority in the heavens are going to be stripped and you're going to be cast out of the heavens, which just means you're going to lose your authority over the universe. And it's interesting. So there's this promise that these spiritual beings that are corrupting all the nations, the gods, these portals of chaos and death, these sea dragons, whatever you want to call them, that enslave all these nations,
Chaos dragons.
these chaos dragons that
Sorry.
enslave all the nations and are these forces of chaos and death, are all going to be destroyed. But humans, this family of Israel, is promised to be elevated to take those positions in the heavens, to rule as fully human beings, which means to participate in God's divine life and power and rule, which is hugely significant. Which is why Psalm 8, I think, is such a big thing. It's like he created humanity a little lower than the
Right,
gods,
right,
the
right,
heavenly
right.
beings. Like we have a little less authority than those. But the promise is that in Genesis 12 and beyond to Abraham's families, your family is actually going to have that power and that authority as you grow into what human beings are supposed to be. And then I'm just going to jump ahead, and we're skipping way too much. But the point is, this family is supposed to embody God's reign, and Exodus is like the origin of this family after Genesis,
Mhm.
where this family is enslaved to the nation of Egypt, and this nation Egypt embodies Babylon. It embodies chaos and death. Pharaoh is depicted as the sea dragon that drowns all the firstborn, that is bringing death and destruction on his own people and on the Israelites. And the gods of Egypt are mentioned a lot in Exodus as like these powers that stand behind Pharaoh, that are basically, again, like the spiritual force behind the evil force behind Pharaoh's chaos and death that he's spreading. And Israel is just enslaved, like literally enslaved in these people. And Moses is called to go and set them free. And there's this progression of salvation and what it means to be saved that I think is super important in this story. Because first, to be saved just means to be rescued. They're rescued from the powers of Egypt, the gods of Egypt, the chaos and death, that are embodied in this empire of systems of destruction and this
Yeah.
evil king. So they're saved from that, and they're brought into the wilderness, with a promised land where they can flourish and be like a garden people. And then they're given the tools to become garden people. And the two things that define God's reign, his order and his life, they are given God's own order and God's own life in two significant things in the wilderness. They're given the Torah, which is like, we think of it as maybe a list of rules, the law, but starting with the 10 Commandments and then 602 other ones. And then they build the tabernacle, God's tent, so God's presence can live with them in a special way.
Mhm.
And they're given this whole sacrificial system so that they can approach and go inside the tabernacle and spend time with God in their midst. And it's supposed to be like they get all the tools they need to grow into Adam and Eve like figures, or like beyond where Adam and Eve went. They are given the order, how to order society through the laws. And it's not like just a list of rules. They think of it as like God's own wisdom for how to order humanity in our context. Here is like this great gift for them, and God's own life in a tent that they can live in and be around,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can be a Garden of Eden where they are, and then go into the land and become like the kingdom of God. But my point is, it gives context to why they received those gifts in
Yeah, yeah.
the wilderness. Then they take the land. They mess up. They do okay. They mess up. They do okay. And they ask for a king. And God is sort of like, I'm supposed to be your king, you know?
Yeah, I always thought that change was interesting.
Yeah.
Or the attitude of like adaptation that God consistently takes on based on like what Israel's like demanding, basically. It's like,
Yeah.
you don't really need a king, but I mean, they keep insisting that like because I think that also works with the context of like what they're seeing around too.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like these other people have kings, like why don't we have a king?
They repeatedly want to be like all the other nations.
Yeah.
And God is like, that's not what we're
Especially
trying
with
to do.
warfare tactics.
Yes. I mean, one of the biggest parts of their Torah, their law, is you don't save up money for your economy. You don't store up gold and silver, which is like, how do you expect an economy to run if you don't store up stuff and you don't have a big military and you don't make military alliances? It's like, how are we supposed to survive? And it's like, you're supposed to be an Eden community. Even if it doesn't functionally make sense to you, you're supposed to be an Eden community in the midst of empires.
Mhm.
And they keep looking at the empires and they're like, I'd rather do it that way. And enslave ourselves again. But so they get all of that. And I think Deuteronomy is actually like central in the Torah. And we often skip over it because it's like, why are they just repeating all the laws again?
Right.
But I think especially Moses' warning to them, where it says, if you follow Torah, if you follow God's wisdom, like Adam and Eve should have done in the garden, and grow in what's good, knowing what's good and evil from God rather than trying to determine it by yourself, you will be blessed. You will be fruitful and multiply. You will be at peace with all nations. Like they will stream in and learn from you. Like we will develop a new humanity that knows how to grow. You will be safe. Like I will protect you. You will live a flourishing life. Basically, if you see the world as a garden, I will make it a garden for you. If you see me as providing for you all the time, even when it doesn't look like it, you will be provided for. You will not be at hostility with each other. These 12 tribes of Israel will be at peace with each other. And you will live. You will live. This is you have a choice between blessing and curse, life and death.
Yeah.
But the alternative, it's like, if you do not obey the Torah and you be like the other nations, you will be exiled from your land, like Adam and Eve were exiled from the garden. You will have to leave. I will not be with you. Like his presence will leave the temple. You will be you will be enslaved or at war with all the other nations. There'll be conflict between the different people groups, and you will be subject to them and their gods. So essentially, it sounds like blessing and curses. It sounds like if you obey me, I'm going to magically bless you. And if you disobey me, I'm going to magically curse you. But it's way more like, if you follow my instructions for how to be garden people, you're going to live a garden life, you know? And if you want to live like all the other empires do, you are going to live like all the other empires do, which rise and fall and are slaves to these gods and all that. I think it's important what you said. God is constantly doing triage, where he's meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
Where he is so committed to working with these people because he promised, that he is even just doing things that like, he's like, maybe this will work or this will work or this will work, as he's like operating with these different humans and in their really morally gray situations. But he's so committed because he promised to work with them that he keeps working with them instead of starting over. And it just creates all these really complicated messes along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this before too. That concept is important about the way God works through imperfect people,
Yeah.
because
Definitely.
pretty much everyone in Israel, as it's going through all of these ebbs and flows and trusting God, not trusting God, letting the temple go into disrepair, then repairing the temple or whatever, restoring it. You see it like I think I mentioned before, like Samson and Judges. It's like not a great guy at all.
No.
Not very redeemable, but God finds ways to do good things through someone that's not great.
Yeah.
and continues to do that. Like even the star person, David, right,
Yeah.
makes a lot
Yeah.
of bad decisions. Solomon, like super wise, all
Yeah.
gifted beyond his years and all of this, has like a bunch of wives and all, and that's
Yeah.
clearly not what God intended.
Well,
So like how
yeah.
God redeems and does good things through these people, and why that's significant in terms of this idea of like redemption and grace and forgiveness, I
Yes.
think is very, very powerful, because even these people that do these great things were morally not the best. And
Yeah.
what does that mean for us?
Well, I think one thing that's important is it sets a context for the whole Old Testament where none of this is ideal.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
It's constantly operating at a sort of a deficit.
Yes, like if you got put in charge all this, like all of the sudden, of a country that just was like completely morally bankrupt, you couldn't start by giving a vision of a utopia. You'd have to just start by addressing some of the root problems that are there and slowly develop them into what you want it to be, right?
Right. Well, because of how humans
Um,
operate,
exactly. Yeah.
right?
So when
You're
you
at a certain understanding and the world is in a certain like
right.
state that you're just like, okay,
Yeah.
what are we going to do to right the direction that things are going?
Yeah. Yeah. So even like the Torah, which is like God's wisdom for these people of how to order themselves, live back into a more garden-like order, is not perfect as far as like every rule in there is a transcendent truth that we should be striving to. It's in their context, how can they get closer to the garden ideal? So they had slaves. How do you get closer to the garden ideal without uprooting their whole economy, like in their like in a way that was unfathomable to them at the time? You love your slave and treat them like your family. Like that's in the Torah, and that's radically different for the time. But it's not the ideal that God wants all humanity in.
Right.
The garden is the ideal. Men and women, the patriarchy is like sewn into the very fabric of society everywhere around the world, but especially in Israel. And so there are all these Torah rules to mitigate that and provide women with rights and ways to survive and thrive. But the ideal is the garden, like Adam and Eve ruling together equally partnered and full of community and love. But that's so Israel does not get the ideal in the Torah. They get an ideal for where they're at to pull them
Yeah.
towards the ideal. And then even God's presence in the midst of them, they don't get in the most ideal way. Like they don't get to walk around with God in a garden like Adam and Eve did. They get this God in a limited way in the midst of their depraved camp that they can go into by following certain instructions to purify themselves from death, to step into a realm of life in a small contained area. So all of it is better. It's getting better, but it's not the ideal. And then even their leader Moses, like you said, like all of these, Moses is like the closest we get to a human really fulfilling their job as an image of God, where he is leading the people well. He is communicating with God. He goes up on a mountain into a heaven on earth space because God's presence is there, and he rules with God in like a divine council kind of way, because he tells God, "Hey, I don't think you should do that. I think you should come with us instead." And God's like, "You're right, man." And there's like this dialogue where they're ruling together, and this is like what humanity is supposed to be for. And then he comes down and he's shining with God's presence like a star, like he is taking up his role as a human, like advancing what a human being is supposed to be. But then, like he murders people, and he has an anger, like he has a rage tantrum, and he hits a rock when he's supposed to speak to it, and he kind of is bitter about his whole job, where he's like, I never wanted to be in charge of these people in the first place, and he's not the ideal. So even like the closest we get to the ideal human is not ideal. I just want to like take a step back to it and realize the word salvation, to be saved, comes from this term in Exodus where they're rescued from chaos and death in Egypt and enslavement to the gods there through the empire. They're rescued by God's grace. Once they're rescued and established as God's people, they receive God's life and order. to grow into a garden. So I think sometimes people get a mixed idea where they think Israel thought they had to obey the law in order to experience God's grace or something like that. But I just want to like rewrite that a little bit and be like, they experienced God's grace by the rescue they did not deserve in the very beginning. And once they become a people of grace and experience God's generosity and accept being the people of God, then they get God's order and life to follow. And they do it very imperfectly as they try. And like you said, so they asked for a king, which God didn't want that for them because he wants them to be his image and basically all kings and queens under the one God as king. They're like, no, we want one king like all the nations have. So he provides Saul, which goes really bad. And then he provides David, which goes a lot better. And we sort of get this idea like we need a good king to get Israel back on track because Israel's not doing well. That's very good, the D plot. And this line of David's, like one of David's descendants will be a good king. And Solomon does a great job. Like at first, like the nation is flourishing. Everyone has their own like fig tree. So you're like, oh, fruit trees all around. That's like Eden. God's temple is built. They get like a big place for God to live with them. They get God's life. They get God's order. They're like, wow, Jerusalem is heaven on earth in this time. Like that is what humanity is supposed to be like. That's the order in life that we're supposed to have. And then the Queen of Sheba comes in and learns from the king. And it's like, it's spreading to the other nations like it was always supposed to. We're going to get humanity back on track and we'll all be a garden people again. And then he has multiple, like thousands of wives, worships all the other gods, and Israel fractures and splits into two, and then fractures even more, and it gets all out of control, and there's like even a bigger failure than it was the first time. And so the prophets, that's where it gets to the prophets, because the prophets are always just like, you guys are messing up, Israel's messing up, Judah, southern Israel is messing up, you guys aren't embodying God's reign, and it's causing destruction. And so you are going to experience the covenant curses. You are going to experience national death. You know, individually, humans experience individual death because they turned away from God's reign. Now you'll experience national death because you aren't embodying God's reign and you're worshiping these other gods instead. You're literally enslaving yourself to the powers that all the other nations are subject to. So don't be surprised when you end up in those nations.
Yeah.
And you experience hostility with those nations. You experience death. You experience chaos because that's what you're bringing on yourself when you mistreat the poor, when you mistreat the immigrant, when you mistreat the widow, when you mistreat the orphan, and when you worship these other gods. And they split and they fragment and they're all spread out. Northern Israel gets wiped out. 10 tribes go like missing. And then there's just Judah and Benjamin in the bottom, and they're become enslaved to Babylon, which ends up enslavement in Babylon, ends up in the exact same failure that Genesis 3-11 ended with Babylon. So Babylon's like the end failure of both plots.
It reminds me a lot of the reading that I was doing when I was making the art pieces for Old Testament.
Yeah, can you elaborate on those
A lot
again?
of the, yeah, I
So
did a drawing or multiple drawings for different books. Each book of the Old Testament as sort of like an artistic summary of the story, which was really helpful for me as the deep dive and going into the narrative of the Old Testament. A lot of what we're talking about, very insightful and sort of almost like a visual theology, kind of, is one way someone put it, which was really, really cool for me and to be able to share with others. So,
like a modern iconography almost. Although maybe that's a very specific definition, and that would have said something.
yeah, I would say maybe not to that extent, but sort of a creative expression that I thought was really fun for me to explore, and I think maybe there should be more of kind of that kind of thing. But no, I mean, yeah, it's the more that we talk about this, I have a greater appreciation for this idea of the temple and its reference to God's presence in the garden. That's really cool. And I think for whatever reason, maybe I didn't see it as significantly, maybe reading the Old Testament, but this is like central theme of God's presence.
Yeah, as
amidst
a
his
part of his
people.
reign. Yeah.
I just I don't know, it's a really cool idea for me, and so I just keep thinking of that, about how important it is that this temple, like, especially in the New Testament too, because it's like the New Testament just goes right back to how it was many times in the Old Testament in Israel, where it's just like disrepair. It's not even really
They're
it's
enslaved
just
to a foreign
used as,
power.
yeah, it's just used as like it's just like a building.
Yeah. Oh, the
It's
temple.
not right.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
temple is just like this place,
Yes,
but it
it's
doesn't it
mismanaged.
completely negates the idea of it being a place where heaven and earth meet.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like neglected. And so, like, it really goes the ebbs and flows, the constant like back and forth that God's like, all right, I'm like trying to save you, and but then you keep making the same
Yeah.
mistakes. But also the concept of, it's not necessarily like this state of God like blessing and cursing, because I think a lot of the language used in the Old Testament, I get that it's really easy to sort of see it like that, but I think, and I mean, please comment on this if this is like too far,
Yeah, go
but
for it.
I would say that it's less of this immediate like action by God blessing and cursing, but more just the natural ebb and flow of the consequences of their
Yeah.
actions.
Yeah.
Especially since we're talking about these spiritual forces, right? These gods that these other nations abide by and are ruled by and are like morphed by. Like, it makes sense that if you do XYZ, do this, rely on the things of the world as your powers,
Yeah.
obviously they're going to end up failing you, because that's not what sustains the universe, is
Yes.
not
Yeah.
these things. And so it's like, whatever, having, making these military alliances, putting the power and like physical might of your nation first and letting that protect us,
Yeah.
that will fail you. Because like, this nation's going to do X, Y, and Z, and they're going to do this, and they're going to outsmart you, and they're going to use, because their power is going to be greater, and they're going to use this, and then, but then they'll fall, and like,
Yeah.
all these nations will fall in their own way. And so it's like, you prioritize these things that are not life, that are not love sustaining the universe,
Yeah.
they're going to fail. And so they just happen to fail because that's what people put their faith in.
Yeah.
So it's
There's
not wise living. It's living to what you think is like the most important, what people put stock in. That's not really what sustains everything.
absolutely, yeah. And I think
Not
you're
like
right.
you're like, I'm gonna smite you.
You're
Because
right.
like,
Well,
but
great.
and so how my question
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
at the end
Yeah.
of that, is how much of that language is meant to be sort of this referencing that, like, these are the natural consequences of your actions, because I think God says that a lot.
Yes.
But I think there's a lot of language that is like, you don't do this in XYZ, or you don't do this in 30 days, and then this is going to happen, something specifically.
Yes.
Is it God's like, like all-knowing wisdom,
Yeah.
where he's like, I know this is going to happen, that it makes it seem like God himself is making it happen?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Or is it less of that and him allowing people to make mistakes? And that is sort of just the consequence, that you do have this free will to do this, even though it's not a great thing. And this is going to happen. Not because I'm literally like telling the people to do this, go after Israel because they made another mistake, I'm going to smite them, but more just the natural consequence of us having free will and choosing every time, or at least Israel choosing every time in this
And
context
Israel sort of
to move
is like
away.
a microcosm of what humanity was supposed to be in the
Right,
story. So
right.
yeah.
So it's really complex, because I think a lot of the language tends to make us seem like it is these isolated acts of
Yes.
God, like
Yeah.
smiting them.
Yeah.
But it's not
No, I think you're
really.
onto something, and I think we could spend a whole episode talking about it. But I do think there's a very nuanced picture of God throughout the Old Testament that develops um, as you learn who this God is. That becomes revealed in the fullness of Jesus on the cross, as Paul says, like Christ crucified is God, and that should reshape how we understand the whole Old Testament as a whole, anyway.
Yeah.
But there is this. I want to be careful how I talk about it because I don't want to ease our fears or tensions too much by just I'll say it like this. Greg Boyd has a great book called The Crucified God, I think, or The Warrior God. I don't remember. Crucifixion of the Warrior God, maybe, where he talks about like all the other nations talked about their gods as warriors. So Israel in talking about their God, talks about him as a warrior frequently.
Yeah.
And that's like that's one of the main pictures, because that is one of the easiest ways to talk about a God. But the picture is nuanced, because the prophets are always like, because you disobeyed God, he will come down and smite you. He's going to scatter you. He's going to destroy you. God is going to destroy you. He's going to bring chaos on you. Then if you're like a secular historian and you're like, what happened to Israel? Well, they made a military pact with Babylon and then broke it. It's like, and then Babylon attacked them and destroyed them and killed them. You're like, well, that seems like the consequence of their own actions pretty clearly. Like, that's not special. That's just the way it is. That's handing over to the consequence of their actions instead of God protecting them, just allowing them to experience the fullness of what they chose. And I think that is a theme specifically where that develops throughout the Old Testament. Sometimes it's not as clear, and then it gets clearer, where it's like God's wrath or justice is allowing people to experience the consequence of what they've chosen. And that develops over time in a nuanced way. It doesn't come out and directly just say that all the time. But sometimes it develops in a natural way, even where it's like God is in the Exodus story, God's going to go smite all the firstborn of Israel.
Right.
And then it says, God guarded the houses of those who put blood on their doorposts so that the destroyer could not enter them. And you're like, who's the destroyer?
Yeah.
And I think so God's guarding them from this being that's killed. Like, what is that, you know?
Yeah.
And it just moves on. And then it's like, expects you to like put the puzzle pieces together somehow. And then when Paul reflects on it, Paul says the destroyer killed those children who, and even John is kind of like, the devil is the destroyer from the beginning, who murders from the beginning, who causes all the death in the world. And you sort of see like this picture of like God saying, I'm going to do this thing, and then lifting his hand and letting evil do its thing when people choose evil. And that's God's justice. And I think Paul sees that. And other books do that well as well. Like Jubilees is a book that's like very much a another kind of fan fiction-y book, like Enoch, that was written around the 1st century to reflect on Old Testament stories. And it goes in and finds stories where God does something destructive and tells those stories again with God lifting his hand and letting evil forces do something destructive. Because that's how the Israelites started to see God. They're like, if God is the creator of all order and goodness, then when God causes chaos and death, it's him removing his presence of order and goodness and allowing tohu vavohu, chaos and disorder, then the state that the world was in before God ordered it, fall back in that way. The flood is a super nuanced picture of that, where I think sometimes we just imagine God just like zap, flood, water drowns everyone. And you're like, oh my gosh, why would God do this? But it's actually very, like, the words it uses, the way it does it is so complex. I definitely recommend Flood and Fury is a really good book on it by Matthew Lynch. But it talks about like God is, the whole world was a sea. That was nothingness. And then God turned that into creation. And that was God's act on it. And when the world is filled with violence and death again, and was filled with nothingness again and chaos and destruction, it fell back into chaos and nothingness again. And God lifted his presence from it so that it could just fall back into the state it was of nothingness. Maybe a modern retelling of that story would be like the world getting sucked into a black hole because we're embracing our own nothingness, so that it could come out again and start again in like a new creation. In Kings, there's this story where God tells David to take a census, he tells David not to take a census, and he does it anyway. Because they're not supposed to take a census of the military. And David does, to like sort of like see his own might in the military. And then in Kings, it says God sent a plague on all of the people there. But in Chronicles, it tells the same story, and it says Satan sent a plague on all the people there. And Chronicles was definitely written later. And I think that's another example of them seeing God's judgment as a, like, lifting his hand and letting chaotic powers do their work.
Very interesting perspective.
It is, yeah. It can make some people uncomfortable because it seems like a contradiction.
Yeah.
But
there's
think,
definitely some people that would be like, actually, no, that's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the point is that when God God's judgment on people is letting them experience the consequence of their actions. People constantly choose chaos and death rather than life and being.
Mm-hmm.
God will allow them to experience chaos and death to a limited degree, like you said.
Yeah.
Hopefully with the desire that they turn back toward life. And so in the beginning of Romans, Paul talks about God's wrath being revealed against people that turn away from him. And the way it says it is over and over again, actually, in Romans, I think like 4 times. It says, so the wrath of God is revealed on these people by turning them over to their actions. And it's like Paul has seen this pattern develop and sees God's justice against evil as while he's the one who usually protects, preserves life and order. If people reject God's life and order, letting them experience the consequence of their actions, and that is the curse of the covenant curses of Israel.
Yeah, that's much more nuanced.
It is. Yeah. And it's not like they thought God was just like, he was just too nice. He would never like kill anybody or anything like that. Because they had it was a nuanced picture of God. Like God gives everything life. God has the right to remove that life in their conception of God that we don't always have. But it is a nuanced picture where eventually the Israelites and the Jewish people could get to a point where they say, actually, God is love and everything he does is loving. And part of his love is sharing his authority with others. And part of sharing his authority with others is letting them experience the consequence of their chosen actions.
And it emphasizes the sustaining life of God, even in a state of brokenness and
chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'd ever connected the dots on those on that. That's really cool. Interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a good tangent. I really like that. With that, the prophets always, amidst their judgment of Israel, they're like, you're going to go into exile. You're going to be scattered. You're going to experience national death. You can imagine now the significance of the temple being destroyed. Like the only place we had access to God's presence is gone. No one's obeying the Torah. So no one is following God's wisdom. We are just like all the other nations, sometimes even worse, because we like sacrificed our own children, and not all the nations do that.
Yeah.
And God just hands them over to the consequences, which is the covenant curses of death, chaos, hostility with the nations, exile from the land, enslavement to empires, which means enslavement to foreign gods and spiritual powers of death and chaos, and experiencing scarcity and vulnerability and all that. So that is when the term gospel is first used in the Old Testament. Is what is our hope then to come back into the land? And Isaiah talks about like this guy who's like running and bringing good news. And the good news is that exile will end. There will be a new king. The reign of God will return. So the hope that they have, the gospel, the good news, is not just like, I want to be very clear for them in their context. They're not even thinking, I hope I go to heaven when I die. That's not in their mind at all.
Yeah.
That's not even like something they're like conceiving of. Or I hope God forgives me my personal sin because I lied to this guy last week or something. That's not important, but that's not what they're thinking of. They are thinking how we were supposed to be the reign of God that fixed the nation. The king was supposed to fix us so that we could fix the nations, so that the nations could fix creation, and we can get this whole storyline back on track. And we have just botched it. We screwed it up. So how are we going to be rescued like a new Exodus? How are we going to be rescued from our enslavement to these powers of spiritual powers manifested in this empire? How are we going to get this land back? How are we going to have a new king who will actually be a good king, like Moses almost was, like David and Solomon almost were? That could be like the fullness of how is God's presence going to come back? We need to build a new temple so God's presence can come back and be with us. How are we going to be a new kind of garden people? How are we actually going to follow the Torah this time, follow God's wisdom? And it doesn't have to be the same way as it was in the wilderness because we're not in the wilderness anymore. But how are we going to become people that automatically follow God's wisdom instead of just trying to follow these rules and failing over and over again? How are we going to draw the nations in? How are we going? It's all these questions at once. And the promises that Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel give is like, you will rule with God. Especially Daniel is really big on Israel. You will rule with God and take your seat on the divine council and be like the stars. You will. And they're like, you will be a people that get your land back. God will send a king who will embody who he is and rescue you all. And he will forgive your sins, which in this context doesn't just mean I forgive every wrong thing you've done individually, but you as a nation have failed, and I forgive you for failing. And I pardon you from the consequences of your failure, which is exile. So forgiveness of sins and return from exile are actually like synonymous in the prophets. You're going to come out of exile. You will be the garden people that Adam and Eve were meant to be, because you will have a king that can lead you there, and you will have God's own spirit, power, presence on your hearts so that you can follow Torah automatically, because you're so connected to God that you don't need to just like read it. You will live it out. And you will be a new kind of people with a new kind of power that will be saved, not from burning forever in eternity or something like that, but saved from the powers of evil that you're enslaved to, saved from exile and saved into this garden land so that we can get creation back on track, fulfill the mission that humanity was supposed to fulfill. And they call all of those things and expectations the kingdom of God. And we need a king to bring us the reign of God back to Israel. And that's their expectations. That's their hope. That's what they're thinking. And they have different ideas of how that might look. They're like, in this reign of God, are we going to, are the nations going to come in and become Israelites? Because the reign of God has always been for Israel in all of our experience. Like, are they all going to become Israelites? Or are we just going to spread the Torah out to them? Like, how is that going to work? You know, they have some questions about that. They're like, what's this king going to look like? When will this king come? How is he going to overthrow the power that's over us, which is like Persia, then Greece, then Rome? Like, how is he going to take over? What is it going to look like for him to cast out the gods and spiritual powers that we're enslaved to? What's it going to look like when he rescues us? When will that be? And then Daniel takes it even further, especially. And he's like, it will look like resurrection from the dead as well, because this is a bigger story than just us. He's like, this is, if the reign of God in the garden was supposed to be transcending death by taking God's own life in the tree of life, then in this reign, if the powers of chaos and death, of sin and death, of failure, if these spiritual powers that we are subject to are really defeated, then we'll all be alive. And that's something that they have to like wrap their head around for a few hundred years to like even like imagine what that means and what that's like. And creation will be in its fullness. And Isaiah gives you pictures of the lion and the lamb. No more death. There's not lion and the lamb, wolf and the lamb, I think.
I don't
Actually. I
remember.
think it's wolf and the lamb. And a baby will play with a snake, and you'll all be. And they're sort of metaphorical, and they're like people will live to 100 years old, but Daniel's more like people will live forever. But like the point is like the world creation will be made right. The king of Israel will have fulfilled his purpose in ruling with God in the heavens on earth and stewarding Israel into the people that save the nations, that save creation and cause creation to consummation with God, where God makes his home in the world through humans, like it was always supposed to be. And that expectation is the reign of God coming back to bring a new creation or renew creation to what it's supposed to be. And that's a lot of expectations. And to say that the gospel is here because all that is coming is such a big vision. But the first thing they know is that they need a king, because it's a king that's going to get Israel back on track. It's going to get the nations back on track. It's going to get creation back on track. So the king is what they're looking for, a king that brings a kingdom.
There's always so much emphasis on waiting and patience during all this time that I'd be like, being one individual person in this storyline, I just always put myself into that part whenever I'm reading these. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Like, I don't know, because all of this happens over such a long
Hundreds
period
of
of
years,
time, like
yeah.
exile periods and all of this transition from different, the different parts of the kingdom of Israel and Judah and all of the different things they experience. I'm like, it's all very gradual.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, like, why that is.
Yeah.
Why is it so gradual?
Well, that's the question for Advent too. It's like
Yeah, right.
they anticipated the Messiah, and we're
Yeah,
anticipating the
waiting.
Messiah again.
And you're like, oh,
we live in this world that's full of chaos and brokenness, and why is it taking so long?
that's
I don't know.
Habakkuk.
Yeah.
That one. Oh man.
I should clarify too. Ezra and Nehemiah at the very end of the Old Testament have this story. They return to the land. Israel returns to the land from Persia, but they're still under foreign occupation.
Yeah.
And they rebuild the temple and
Right.
rebuild
They're like
Jerusalem.
granted the ability to go back
Yes,
by the changed heart.
they do.
Right.
And so they rebuild Jerusalem, they rebuild the temple, and they get the Torah again, and they read the Torah to everybody. But it doesn't change a thing.
Yeah.
God's presence doesn't return to the temple in the story. It's just there. It's not a glorious temple like it was before. Jerusalem seems to be,
And they build a giant wall.
yeah, the leaders of Israel keep trying to do the right thing, and they keep doing the wrong thing. Like they make everyone get divorced, and they whip each other, and like this is whole. They freak out. They're full of anger, like Moses had. And then even they're not following the Torah, and to them that's like evidence that they're like, we are still in exile. We might not be as directly enslaved to the empire, even though we're still under an empire's occupation. We are definitely still enslaved to the gods and the powers, even if we're not trying to be. We are. And the fruit, like the evidence of the idolatry is our sin or our inability to follow God's wisdom. So they're still waiting. And even though they're back in the land, they're like, this is not what we were waiting for. We're still waiting. And that's sort of how the Old Testament ends. So next time we'll talk about Jesus directly. That was like a big old of the Old Testament. But like that, I think that sets an expectation. Like when they're like awaiting the kingdom of God, they're awaiting a king to bring all of these things to fruition.
Yeah.
They're not waiting for someone to die so they can go to heaven. They're not waiting for someone to forgive them of their individual sins as far as like doing something bad. That's one small part of this big picture. They're waiting for someone to bring them out of exile to make them into the vocation humanity was supposed to have as Israel for the nations. Yeah, and for God to return to Jerusalem. So we'll talk about that next time.
Cool.
It's good Advent thoughts as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm a little worried these last two are both been a little dense or heavy, but I'm trying to be thorough. And again, the gospel story is like the story of the Bible, right? It's the running theme. So when the kingdom of God arrives, if you haven't read the Old Testament, that means nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's the whole Old Testament is the story of like, what would that look like to live under God's reign, actually, to overthrow the reign of these powers so that we can live under God's reign. So, yeah. All right. Well, please leave a review. Unless you didn't like it, then don't. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. We would love to hear from you. If you have thoughts or questions from today's episode, please feel free to reach out and email us at info@kingdomcommentary.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or rating wherever you found this podcast and send it to a friend. That helps us a lot. Kingdom Commentary Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit supported by listeners like you. If you'd like to support what we're doing or become a patron, sign up for our Patreon and get exclusive access to bonus content, or go to kingdomcommentary.com/give to make a donation. Finally, Kingdom Commentary is co-hosted by Matt Holliday and Josh Brinley and produced by Wilkins. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.